Welcome to the Hyper Voice, episode 45. This is a show all about Pokemon's video game championship series. I am your host, Steven Morioka, and today we are joined by Alex Underhill.
Hey guys.
And Justin Burns.
Hey everyone.
We're going to be talking about a lot of different topics today, but we have Justin on today. Welcome to the show. And Justin, you recently had a pretty good finish at a recent regional.
Yeah, just last about a week ago, I placed second at the Santa Clara Regional Championships, and I was pretty happy about it because I haven't had, a great finish in a few months. My last two events were pretty bad, so it felt good to, make cut again and then get back to finals.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine having success is pretty important for any player who's heading into Worlds and looking to make a big run, deep run in there as well. But Justin, so you actually at the start of this 2019 season, this whole year, you actually won the first major regional of the season. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this was way back in August of last year, right at Worlds when they announced the new format. And the first format was Sun Series, and it didn't allow Mega Pokemon and it didn't allow Z-moves. And a lot of people were scrambling, to figure out how, what the best teams would be since it was such a different format from what we were playing. And I actually built a team with Justin Krubaugh the day before as we were, flying out to Philadelphia, and we both managed to top cut, and I had the first seed and I managed to take it home. So that was a pretty awesome start to the season, and I really kind of just built off of that momentum all season, and now I'm in a really good position to get a Day 2 Worlds invite this year.
So Justin, where does that team that you built at for the first regional of the season, where does that rank amongst your favorite teams of all time that you've ever used?
I think I'd put it in top 3.
Yeah.
I do have some teams I really liked that I didn't win with.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely that one is probably, not quite at the top, but definitely a contender.
Nice. So, Team Justin was pretty successful for that first regional of the season here, and I think one of the biggest things to come out of that regional was the Assault Vest Toxicroak. Now, I remember back then as I was watching this scene from afar, is that a lot of people were making a big deal out of it, like Toxicroak sort of came out of nowhere, which is true. It's pretty popular for the rest of that series. And it had success in the past, mostly in winning Worlds in 2009 with the Japanese player. I can't remember I believe that's Kazuyuki Tsuji. And then it had numerous success throughout the 2010 season. So it's been around, but just tell us about its resurgence during Sun Series.
Right. So it really had a lot of good matchups against the top Pokemon. The dry skin ability let it sit in front of Scarf Kyogre, could hit it back with low kick. It also had the poison typing's poison jab that hit Xerneas if it had to. It could hit Incineroar with low kick, which was a very big deal back then. And it really did have a lot of utility with Fake Out and Feint. And, towards the end of Sun Series and going into Moon Series, people actually started switching back to Focus Sash and put on other moves like Helping Hand and Sucker Punch and things like that. And it really just was able to splash on a lot of archetypes. So it ended up being not like a top Pokemon, but it was a pretty solid top 20 usage staple just because it fit on so many teams that didn't have a Groudon.
Not to steal your thunder, Justin, but in my mind, the original creator, I still give credit to Calvin Chan after he played against Krubaugh at one of our local events and was using Toxicroak. And the team that Justin had brought to that tournament had, I think, 0 Pokemon that could damage Toxicroak. It was quite literally the perfect counter to his 6. Justin was using, an early meta team with Quillfish at the time, but it's just a really funny memory for me, and I think that I just credit Calvin a bit of inspiration for the idea of Toxicroak.
Yeah, I actually would give Calvin credit for the Toxicroak too, just because I remember when Justin messaged me and said he just got destroyed by a Toxicroak, and that was in the back of our minds all week leading up to Philadelphia, and we ended up finding a really good team that it fit well on.
I mean, I think the presence of that Toxicroak now heading into whatever regional that was that you won. What was the location again?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. Yeah, you just mentioned that. Sorry about that. But right, was Toxicroak, any sort of presence in the metagame prior to this regional, or do you feel like that success there is really what had the major impact?
Well, with the exception of Calvin running it, I would say absolutely no one used Toxicroak.
Yes.
And afterwards, a lot of people started taking a good look at it. And actually, at the very next regional, Ashton Cox brought a team that had Xerneas and Lunala, but he also had a Toxicroak, and he ended up winning. And I think he had the assault vest, and I think he had it trained very similarly to how I trained mine.
While you did mention earlier, Steven, that Toxicroak's not totally new to VGC, I think I do agree with Justin here that it was very new for everybody at this point in the metagame, especially for everybody that is playing VGC now, because there's not so many veterans around like you that know that 2009 and 2010 Toxicroak was just this big deal. Things have kind of fallen off since then, or those results have kind of vanished in a way that we don't get like a pamphlet at the beginning of VGC where it's just like, and here's all the past success stories and all teams and stuff like that. So it was cool that Justin was able to breathe new life into this Pokemon in a new format.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I just want to make one more parallel here is that Toxicroak really seemed to have a similar impact to how people like to team build and prepare for it. Kind of like maybe not in the same major way as Hitmontop Kyogre did in 2010, but for anyone who's familiar with that lead, you'll understand the parallel I'm making here.
We now have Serena. Serena's the new
goody, Serena. Yeah.
Serena and Kyogre kind of took that role.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, more of a modern analog here. But, so anyway, Justin's had a lot of success over the recent, past 2 years, really. So, let's move on to, Justin, you also took second at an international last season, is that right?
Yes, I got second at the North American International Championships last year. And this year, I placed third at the Oceania International Championships.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, Justin is the real deal here, folks. So let's move into more modern times here. Always nice to reminisce and just review, what's happened earlier in the year. But let's move into our Ultra Series here and talk about this California regional a little bit more in depth because we do have Justin on here. So, like you just mentioned, you took second at this regional, which was a week ago, roughly. And tell us about your team. Tell us about your experience there.
Right. So I used a Rayquaza Kyogre team. It had some of the standard staples you'd see on a Rayogre team, like Incineroar, Crobat, and Bronzong. I think one of the more interesting things about it is that I had a Serena, which, after Scarf Ogre's decline, now that we have Primal Kyogre, most people weren't really thinking about it in team building anymore because you couldn't have the really oppressive nature that Scarf Kyogre plus priority blocking plus helping hand plus feint provided. But I think it still had merit just because Incineroar and so many other fake out Pokemon are such a big deal. I think if you can disrupt people's flowcharts that involve fake out and protecting and things like that, you can really still run through teams with like Primal Kyogre and even other aspects of the team, like setting up Trick Room with Bronzong or using Mega Rayquaza to just punch holes in teams. Priority blocking is really important in that, and the Helping Hand and Faint also like makes those Pokemon even more strong. So I do think it ended up being like really helpful, and maybe it will be something more people look at in the future, or maybe it's not actually as strong as I see it as. But I do think it's an interesting Pokemon.
I think I've seen your team, your 6, pop up in other result lists that have showed up on my Twitter feed and such, whether it was a special event or a regional cross over in the Oceania region or something. I believe I've seen it have success at other tournaments, so you've definitely made an impact on the metagame with this latest team.
Right, and I did actually use the same 6 at the Europe International Championships. I didn't do too well there. I did change up the sets, thanks to Major Bowman and Mr. B-Dog for, kind of providing insight on how they changed the team and used it themselves. And I think Mr. B-Dog, Brendan Lewis, actually, got top 16 or top 32 at the Hartford Regionals with the same 6.
Okay.
So I have to ask here. So you use the same 6 Pokemon now. Was it just poor play in Berlin, or was it the change of sets that really kind of was able to push you through to more success here?
Right. So I think it was like a combination of a lot of the changes I made. The sets were definitely a lot better at not just countering kind of the strong teams, but making sure I have, a matchup against a wide variety of teams. Just because at Berlin I had an Assault Vest Rayquaza, and it was designed to do specific things, but when it was against like any like random Pokemon, it wasn't as strong as it could be when I switched to Choice Band for Santa Clara and was able to just pick up KOs more often. And another thing, I think, prepping for the Europe International is really difficult, just because I actually ended up playing 9 different restricted pairs in the tournament across 9 rounds. So I think that was kind of a pretty crazy schedule. And I actually did start 5-1, but I kind of played poorly towards the end, had difficult matchups, and I ended up losing 3 in a row and finishing 5-4.
Now, you did mention that you faced 9 restricted combos across your 9 rounds, which I think is absurd and insanely cool of a run. That's really cool to hear. I'd want to talk more about that later, how we see so many more viable restricted combos in this year as opposed to previous years like 2016 or other formats that have allowed these restricted legendaries. But one thing about your run that I wanted to make a parallel or draw a parallel with is comparing you to Tommy, who we had on a week before as a guest. Tommy also had a bit of a rough time in Berlin, and while he changed his team up more than I imagine you changed yours, since he changed the 6 Pokemon, he went from Xerneas to Necrozma, Tommy was able to turn around from a less than amazing run in Berlin to a very amazing run in Hartford the following week. And so it seems like you and Tommy were able to kind of learn from your misfortune in Berlin and really capitalize it back here in the U.S.
Yeah, I definitely think our experiences there really helped us, going forward. I think for him more so just because I remember he was not in a great mood after the tournament, but he really turned it around in the span of a week, and he's a close friend of mine, so I was really happy for him when he took home the Hartford Regional.
Yeah, I mean it's really can be really motivational when you don't do well at an international. That's a really big important tournament, and you want to make sure you're having success there. So it was great that both of you were able to pick yourself up from the ashes, and then have a good run in the following regionals upcoming. And it's silly that we're doing a lot of foreshadowing here, talking about the restricted combos as well as Incineroar being a big deal and all that. And we're going to get to that in just a little bit here. Now, Justin, I have another question here for you about the California Regional. So, which of your matches was the most intense, most exciting for you, or the most memorable?
I'd have to think. I think definitely in Swiss, I had a lot of really close matches. I had a really fun set against James Bake, who was running a variation of X-Ray, and it was really like kind of back and forth, really close, and I was really happy I squeaked out a win just because he defeated me in the Roanoke Regional Finals a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
I also had a really close match against a Tapu Lele Ultra Necrozma team, and throughout the kind of the course of the 3 games, I really didn't have much information, and eventually I started getting bits of information through the whole game, and eventually that led to me making a really good game plan in Game 3, and I actually was pretty proud about that.
Excellent, and that's great to hear. It's really cool. It's always fascinating to me what people's takeaway or what players' takeaways are from the tournaments they played and what matches are most memorable to them, especially after we've had a successful run as well. So that's really, really neat to hear. Now, does anyone else have any closing thoughts on this California regional before we move on to our next topic?
I think 2 of the big things that I think we should take away from the top cut is that Xerneas Groudon's still here. It's not going anywhere. And the parish mode really helped it, I think. It helped pressure my Ray Ogre team really well in ways that it usually can't, just because I usually have a really good matchup against the standard Zerndon stuff. And the other thing was that Lunala had a kind of a big comeback, and we didn't really see it at all at the first few Ultra Series regionals, and there wasn't much of it in Berlin either, but it top cut 3 times, I believe. So I think Lunala is definitely coming back.
And so we'll have to look forward to seeing what Lunala does at the coming tournaments. I know that people are trying all kinds of different things on their Lunalas now, between Z-moves and Scarfs, trying them with different combinations than we are used to seeing. I think it's a very cool Pokemon, and what we have to look forward to is just one more regional coming up very soon, Madison in Wisconsin, the last regional in the U.S.
Yeah, that sounds right. It's the last regional in the U.S., North America, for this continent. I don't know if it's the last regional altogether around the world before the North American International in Columbus, but it's one of the last ones here, one of the last big ones left for folks to pick up points. Heading into the international, especially for rankings, for standings. And, this is a kind of a big point for, I guess not, I don't know if it's a big point or not, but it is an area for the metagame to, take a jump, or we'll just see what happens here this upcoming weekend. I don't know. What are your thoughts on just Madison coming up? And then, if you want to transition into the, Snowball here, you can feel free.
Right. So the metagame is definitely still open-ended right now. I believe, we've had the 3 North American regionals and the international championship. We've had 4 different restricted pairs win the tournaments. So there's not really, it doesn't seem like there's a strongest team yet. And that's really different from Sun and Moon series, where we saw, the Tornadus, Kyogre, Xerneas teams just dominate regional after regional. So it'll really be interesting to see where we head this weekend, and it's the last big data point before the last international championship of the season. So I definitely think it'll be important for players to watch what happens at this regional.
And players at this point are looking to gather points for all different reasons. We've got players in 3 different categories, I would say. The top 6 or so players in the U.S. are looking to lock in for top 4 for day 2, getting the little bit extra cash in terms of a travel award versus a stipend. Then we have a number of players trying to squeeze into those last 2 spots, 7 and 8, trying to make it into the day 2. There's not a lot of room in there, but there's a lot of players gunning for that spot. And then we have the players just trying to lock up their invite. Those players are trying to calculate what all they need to get at the remaining tournaments. Mid-seasons, we just had a bunch of mid-seasons over the past weekend because with Madison coming up, a lot of players might not have another chance. There will be a mid-season at Madison, but that's not the main event. You're there for the regional. That's where the big points lie. And so after Madison, it's just going to be premier challenges for US-based players if they want to look to lock up their invite before relying on that last and final event, North America International.
Yep, and I'm sure a lot of people really want to get their invites before the International Championship. Last year I did not have my Worlds invite going into North America Internats, and I can tell you it was really stressful.
Yeah, brings me back to the old days when the only way to qualify for Worlds was at your respective national or nationals if you could attend multiple in Europe. But yeah, so how are the two of you feeling really about, this regional? Usually around this time of the season, we have a good sense of where the metagame is and what's popular, what really everyone has to prepare for. So how are you two feeling where, the metagame's a little more fresh and it's kind of more up in the air as well?
So I would say my approach right now is that I'm trying to find the team that's best for me and find the team that I feel is a winningest team that doesn't have to worry too much about the different matchups you're going to face. As Justin had brought up, we've seen different things win all the major tournaments so far, at least major tournaments if you're a US-based player. And so I'm trying to worry less about preparing for the metagame. Obviously, every player does have to respect the metagame and what trends there are in it, but I'm just trying to focus on what works for me, what's going to make me play my best and most confident, so that way I can do my best at this last regional.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree with Alex there. I think finding a team that's just, in general, very strong, like without, regarding the current state of the metagame, I think that's important, just because, you don't know what you're going to run into in these Swiss rounds, People can, build anything, and there's a lot of things that are really strong. So if you can find a consistent way to put out enough damage to win the game, then you're on track. Obviously, there's some really big Pokemon you always have to watch out for, like Xerneas and the Primals and Rayquaza. But I think mostly you just want to find a team that can win games against whatever it goes up against, and maybe save the metagame calls for tournaments that are more likely to have a centralized metagame like Internats or even Worlds.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I always preach comfortability with your team, just having, that practice with it. You know what to do in almost all situations that you're put in during these regionals. And then sometimes you are going to be in positions where you're going to have to improvise, and that's always the mark of a good player who can do that. But let's move on here to talking about the championship points race we've been faced with these last 3 years with the introduction of the internationals. So Alex, do you kind of want to take away and describe, what we're trying to get at here, in that with the championship points race in 2017 and 2018 were very similar in how they approached it, and this year was kind of different, and we're just going to talk about here what we think of this system right now.
Yeah, so basically the way that you could divide it up is we have like generations almost now, where Tommy, who we had on last week, was a Generation 1 Snowball. And we use the term Snowball to describe this because it's easy and because we talk about the snowball effect, a snowball rolling down a hill, getting bigger and bigger until it just accumulates so much, mass, or in this case, points, that it becomes unstoppable. And so Tommy was one of the players to experience this in his first season, or the first season that this was introduced, where the players at the top of the leaderboards would earn trips to the next international. And the oversight of this was that the players going to internationals allowed them to earn so many points to keep themselves at the top of the leaderboards that they just ended up earning points to the next international, the next, and the next, and the next. And we saw mostly the same players at the top the whole time. going to all the internets, and nobody was able to really catch up because if you couldn't just spend your own money to travel to an international that's in another country, you were stuck competing at events at home, which just don't award as much points as a international. I got to experience this in the second generation after my win at Fort Wayne in the first regional of the season, kind of like Justin had won the first regional of this most recent season that we are currently playing in. And I then used that money to, pay my way to go to London and blah, blah, blah. I've talked about this before, but I got to be a snowball. I got to experience it almost all the way to the end, where just at the end I did tail off and not get day 2. But now we're come to the third year of this system, and they changed it a bit. And since it's very relevant to Justin, who got second at North America International Challenge last year in 2018, he also won that first regional of the season, like I said I had. Justin has been on the snowball since pretty much the very beginning of the 2019 season, technically a little bit before it. So Justin, you want to talk about what it's been like for you and what it's like now?
Yeah, so Alex was kind of hinting at it, but my snowball story does actually date back to the end of last season. So I got second at North America International. So that happened. At the time, we didn't know how the snowball was going to change. We just assumed that, the people in top 8 would get stipends to the next international. And that's not what happened. What they announced, all the internationals and all their dates. And they also added a little extra information saying that the stipends will be based on specific quarters, which means you have to have earned, the championship points in a specific amount of time to do so. And for the first international, they were doing from the end of the 2018 Latin American International Championships up until the 2018 North American International Championships. And because internationals is such a huge payout, the 400 championship points I got was enough to get a travel award to the first international of the season back then. So that's how I ended up getting on the snowball. And when I got that paid trip, I realized that, maybe I do have a chance to snowball, whereas before I didn't think I would, be able to, do well enough to end up snowballing. The ironic part about that is that, because I was so motivated to get the next stipend, I went to all the regionals in that quarter, and I ended up getting a stipend despite getting 0 CP at the Brazil International Championships. So that's kind of how my snowball story began.
That first win definitely helped a lot, winning that first regional of the season.
Right, and even though it does reset every quarter, we've had a lot of players that stay so consistent that they're still getting travel awards every quarter, and that actually wasn't the case for me. I did not get a stipend to this upcoming international, but I'm fine with that since it's within our own region, so I'll be able to make it there anyways.
So what I think we need to analyze comparing Generation 3 to Generation 2 is that the system was changed in that it is now quarter-based, basically quarter-based, where quarter 0 was the one that Justin earned a trip to the Latin America International Championships, and then the quarter 1 starts from the end of Worlds, including the Open, the Nashville Open, and then all the points you've earned from the Nashville Open till the Latin America International Championships earn you a trip to the next. And I've talked about this before on the show, but this was different. This was an attempt to nerf the system so that we didn't just see all the same players at the top. And now, I'm not going to try to discredit any of the players at the top because all those players are up there for a reason. They're tournament winners. They're consistently putting up big results. But the system still is somewhat flawed in that while the points reset every cycle, you are still getting a trip to that next international. And as I had mentioned earlier, the internationals are the best way to earn points. They give you the highest payouts for the smallest success, to put it. I guess that's one way to put it. But for example, like a top 64 would be giving you 100 plus points, whereas you'd have to top cut a regional, get like in the top 8 to get 100 points. And so it's much easier to earn large amounts of CP at the international championships. And so that's why we've seen a lot of these players remain at the top. The snowball system is still in effect. However, it's a little bit harder for the players to remain at the top, so they do have to still continue to put up good results. They still have to continue to earn CP. They can't just kind of sit on this fat mound of CP that they've earned from previous tournaments. But they are given the opportunity to earn large amounts of CP at the coming internationals.
Yeah, so with the spacing out of the different internationals here and the travel award system now, is that it's really just all about opportunity, right? These players are given more opportunities to get these more points. Those who capitalize on them are going to get to stay on the snowball, as we've all been calling it these past few years. And this is a system that is kind of going to be kind of difficult to break. The Pokemon Company International has been making a lot of headway in trying to mitigate the negative effects of this, but it's something that with the current championship point system, and just with our day 2 and the qualification having a championship point bar, this is something that is I don't really know how quickly or how easily they can change this for the upcoming season. And Justin, I wanted to ask both of you here, for that first wave of the awards to the Latin American International Championship for this season, so for the 2019 season, which would have been like November 2018, that was announced like after that North American International in 2018. And they talked about how like the points would have been accumulated retroactively, or like they announced that this was a retroactive kind of thing.
Yeah, it was very retroactive. There was about a month and a half where I know, I just gotten second, but I still kind of felt bad because it wasn't enough to get a day 2 invite. It wouldn't have been enough to get a day 2 invite. I ended up, thinking about, not playing this season just because I was kind of really, really bummed out about, having to try to go through day 1 again. But then they like announced it about a week or 2 weeks before Worlds. So it kind of like, breathed new life into my kind of time playing VGC. And I do think, the system is still kind of broken and definitely needs reworked. But I am really thankful that I got to kind of experience the snowball life.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine people are happy with the timing of that announcement and, with the content of that announcement. And, Justin, you were fortunate enough to be, gifted this with that situation. So, it's all, again, like I mentioned earlier, it's all about opportunities and being able to capitalize on them.
Right, and I do understand that, for every person that does get an opportunity, there's, an opportunity taken away from someone else in terms of, travel awards. So there are some people that thought they were getting travel awards and didn't, and they felt slighted, and, I definitely understand that, but I definitely, was fine with, taking what I can get. And
yeah, and I mean, it's like, it's not a fault of yours. It's the company that decided that. So, yeah, exactly. You're not going to say no to something that they did. This is a similar way to how when we first started the Snowball, right after the 2016 season ended, it's the same kind of deal. Like, nobody knew any of this was coming, and they awarded all those players the travel awards and the trips to that first international based on the previous season's championship point leaderboard compared versus the world's results. But yeah, one of the arguments I always use is how, like, even if you're given the opportunity, you still have to be able to do well there. If you don't do well, yes, then, what does it matter? But I guess that does come down to being able to travel and just attend the event and all that. But, we're always so focused and honed in on the championship points and who's been successful and all that. But
Yeah, as Steven said, opportunities are presented to them, but they still have to take advantage of them. And so, yeah, it comes down to playing the game and doing well. So you can't knock the players for being at the top because they've earned it.
Now, I guess let's answer this question here. The Snowball Race in general, I mean, we've kind of touched on this already, but is this a good or bad thing right now for the players, our game, and what do we want to see moving forward?
I think it would be a lot more fair if we had, I think the ideal solution is no snowball in general. If that's not on the table, then we do need to think about, how can we make this as fair as possible for the whole player base. And I don't have any changes I can think of at the moment. Maybe you guys would have other ideas, but it might be possible. Another thing to think about is that we're not the only ones, with this circuit. We have the TCG side. Those players are also getting travel stipends, and I think ultimately, however our system has changed, it'll also be to make sure that the TCG players are happy with what they have too.
So what I wanted to bring up was that there's a lot of money spent on these travel awards, and it's a nice reward for the top players. It's it's happened since the introduction of the bar, at least a year after the introduction of the bar, and it gives players something to chase for. Day 2 and all these other rewards outside of getting an invite for those top players, so that once they reach 400 CP, they don't just call it quits and sit at home until Worlds. And it's nice to have that to drive players, but I do wonder what was the intention of the Snowball in the first place. Was it just meant as a reward on top of other rewards like, money that you earn from winning events? Because I remember when we first saw the introduction of these travel awards, a lot of people thought it was to get the top players to all the internets so that you could have the biggest names at the biggest tournaments and to kind of increase their get their faces on camera, get people to root for people, make our game seem more esports because all the top players are at these big events. However, I think it would be a lot better if that money was just taken away. A lot of the Snowball players, and I don't want to speak for everybody because that's not fair to everybody who's experienced the Snowball, but from my experience when I was talking with Snowball players, they seem to think that the system is very flawed and it doesn't seem very necessary. It would be better if the money was put elsewhere. I know a lot of people have suggested regional entry fees. They are very high. Tournament entry fees are just very high, and reducing that might be able to help the game. So that's just one thought, but I don't want to speak for everybody.
Yeah, I think one of the original intents, you were just mentioning, is how people were looking for storylines. We wanted more mini worlds throughout the season, something to highlight and focus and spotlight some of these players throughout the season, rather than just the last national/international of the season, and then the World Championships, and then we're kind of very quiet amongst the realm of esports throughout the rest of the season. But yeah, just the way the current system's set up is you mentioned, people gotta have motivation to keep on playing throughout the season. Because once, especially with the championship point bar we have right now, regardless of the value, people are gonna hit it. And if they don't have anything else to strive for, then, they're all just gonna wait until Worlds and let's save money and, maybe have more effective uses of their time. But, yeah, in terms of improvements, I also can't at the moment, I can't think of anything to change right now because I also, this isn't something we plan to talk about. This is just something I thought would be neat to ask all of us. But, just the way the systems is set up right now, I don't see the travel award system changing too much next season. And this with a championship point bar qualification method right now, that kind of has to stay because. Otherwise, people are going to fall off. You're going to lose those big-name players throughout the tournaments because there's not going to be an incentive to play anymore.
One thing I do like about the quarterly stipends is that you do have to keep playing all season. You can't like, all right, I've got 1,500 championship points. I'll see you guys in a few months at Day 2 Worlds. And you can't, even if you get your invite, you're not really in contention for Day 2 Worlds, but maybe you can go for a stipend, during like a certain 3 months. You can just say, all right, I'm just going to, focus my time for this short period of time on going to like, maybe the 3 or 4 regionals that are counting for that stipend. You can go for that. Yeah. You've got like little small goals you can achieve even if you're not really in contention for Day 2, or maybe you've already clinched it.
I did talk about it in the past, but that did happen to me this season. I got to take advantage of this new system because I was able to do well in Collinsville. I decided I'll go to Toronto, as Justin had said, attend those next couple of regionals. I went to Toronto, did well enough there that I was like, all right, I think I can book Berlin, and that was the reason behind that. I did end up getting the travel award to the North America International. As an aside, it did end up putting me into the Day 2 race, but that's never what it was all about. It was just about being able to take advantage of this new system, and that there's this little chunk of time that suddenly I'm one of the top players in it, and I have something to shoot for.
Yeah, so this quarterly system is something I prefer seeing. If we do, continue with this moving forward. So do the two of you prefer this one now or the one from previous years?
This one now.
I think I prefer this one right now. It's, it obviously would have helped me if I was on the old system, since I've, stayed in top 8 all season, but I think it's more fair to do it quarterly. Even if, if you want to get all the travel awards, it is pretty stressful. You really have to consider, going to all the regionals, which I think, barely anyone has time to do that, but I think the pros outweigh the cons for sure.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that was our discussion of the, Snowball Race of 2019 and years past, these last 3 seasons we've had it. But we're going to transition here into talking about a very special, specific Pokemon here. We're going to kind of focus in on, everybody's favorite this last roughly year and a half, 15 months or whatever it's been, and that's Incineroar. One of the biggest things with Incineroar is that it was released in the middle, or like nearly in the beginning of the 2018 season. It was like March 2018, a week before regional or something, if I recall correctly. And one of the biggest selling points for it is its stats, is that it has Intimidate and Fake Out. The only other 2 Pokemon that also have those capabilities with Fake Out and Intimidate are Scrafty and Hitmontop. And, they've also had their successes in the past, both with Intimidate as well as prior to it. So Hitmontop was really popular with Technician prior to utilizing Intimidate late in 2010, and then throughout the rest of its run in the other seasons like 2012, 13, and I guess 16, when Wolf was really the only one who used it there to any notable success. And then Scrafty, same thing, only had Moxie or Shed Skin in 2011 until it got Intimidate through either Dream World or like the Grotto stuff in Black 2, White 2 in 2013 or 2012. I think it didn't get Intimidated until 2013. But anyway, I want to ask you, so 2 questions before we go dive deep into Incineroar. When did the 2018 season officially start? Was that December 2017 start? January 2018 start?
Yes, it was January 1st, 2018.
Okay, awesome. So Incineroar would have jumped in about like roughly 2 months into that season, that format. So, really quickly here, what was Incineroar doing before it had Intimidate? Was it even anything notable to be considered?
It had a bit of a usage. It wasn't used a ton, but it was used on select teams. People like to take advantage of the Fake Out Dark type, Fire type, I guess. I mean, that's literally what it has over Scrafty. Over Hitmontop is that it has this different typing that comes with its set of immunities. It can't be burned, for example, as well as that immunity to psychic types. It was just it took advantage of that signature Z move as well. If you needed very strong dark damage on Pokemon like Cresselia, or whatever else you would see, like Metagross in that format. But it wasn't used a lot.
The main archetype that Incineroar was used on before it got Intimidate was Mega Gardevoir, and it had really good type synergy with it, and Fake Out plus being slow let Mega Gardevoir set Trick Room more consistently, and you could do more things under that Trick Room. But that's really about it. There were some players that kind of used it as a kind of a tech mon, but it wasn't used that much.
Okay, and then once Incineroar gets Intimidate, that has a pretty significant impact for the metagame as well as just its placement among a lot of teams, especially this season. So just talk about Incineroar's role here throughout the 2018 and 2019 season, and just what it's done to shape the game.
So what I think Incineroar's defining role is slowing down the game, allowing for setup plays to happen, whether it's Trick Room or boosting your stats or what have you. Incineroar allows players to set things up, set up board positions. At some point in the 2018 season, a lot of people started to learn that U-turn is one of Incineroar's best move, and that kind of sets it apart from the Pokemon that you mentioned before, Scrafty and Hitmontop, who oftentimes would run eject button so that they could pivot in and out. But Incineroar had its own way to do that through U-turn. And so it could come in, Intimidate, Fake Out, U-turn out, and recycle this all over again. And it was a really, really good thing because it slowed down the pace of play. And maybe some players don't prefer that. Maybe some players like to have hyper-offensive teams that clear the game in 4 turns or something. I've been there with my hard Trick Room teams. But I think it's overall a good thing. And the reason being, the longer the game, the more interactions between the players, the less a chance that luck just determines the outcome of a set, the more chances that you can outplay your opponent instead of just losing the game just to one last turn call. And so I think that slowing of the pace of play is good for the game, and we see very high usage from Incineroar, but I don't mind it at all. I think it's a good thing.
Alright, so I almost fully agree with everything Alex said. To answer Steven's question, what does Incineroar do? Let me tell you, Incineroar does everything. It's one of the biggest toolbox Pokemon we've ever had in the game's history. Just having Fake Out, Intimidate, and U-turn all on one Pokemon is absolutely broken in terms of setting up your board position. If you want to have a favorable board position immediately, you run Incineroar. It just helps out every team. Its defensive typing isn't great against some of the more popular Pokemon like Kyogre and Groudon, but that doesn't really matter right now because you can Fake it out, so that protects you for a turn. You can switch it out if you have to. If you're under Trick Room, you can U-turn out into a different Pokemon. It's never really in a bad position. Another thing is that it wasn't as used in 2018 as it was in 2019. When Sun Series started, Incineroar was almost on every team. I think Philadelphia Regionals, it was on 31 of the top 32 teams. I think that's absolutely insane for any Pokemon, let alone a non-restricted. So, in my opinion, I think Incineroar is good for the pace of the games. I think in terms of team building, if we want to see things change up in the future, I think we do need to remove its hidden ability. Game Freak has changed hidden abilities in the past, so I don't think it's far-fetched to think that there's a chance that next generation we don't have Incineroar with Intimidate. And I know I think I've had it on almost all my teams since its hidden ability was released. But I think we would be better off without it, even if it does give players more room to outplay within the game. I think maybe strong team building would shine more without it.
Yeah, so that's a good point you mentioned about being able, or Game Freak could potentially change its ability in the future. I mean, I personally don't think that's gonna happen. I know they've done it for like Chandelure, who originally was supposed to have Shadow Tag, but that never happened. Same with Zapdos and Lightning Rod, right? And those change from generation to generation. But I just honestly don't see that happening for Incineroar.
Well, I think going forward, we will see that Incineroar is not going to be in the next format. It's rare to find starters that are like in the wild. X and Y allowed you to find the Kalos starters as well as, the original Kanto starters because they had Mega Evolutions that were just introduced. But otherwise, it's very likely that Incineroar won't be legal for the next format. I could just be dead wrong.
Yeah, totally with you there.
But I think that for the game, we're going to see the Tapus, we're going to see Incineroar just disappear, which I think will be very interesting, very new and fresh, and I'm very excited to see where that happens, or where that goes. But afterwards, yeah, it's probably going to make a big comeback in 2021. Like, did you miss me, guys? The king is back. The king has returned.
Yeah, I'm back to back to reclaim my crown, right? Another kind of like, I don't know if this is an insult or just but it was also just introduced into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, in the middle of near the fall of 2018, which was, really just kind of funny. Just saying, like, we've had enough of you in Pokemon. We don't want to see more of you in Smash. But anyway, another question I have here about Incineroar is for, I guess, what situations, what teams are you not going to be, and even thinking about putting Incineroar on? Like, what would your reasoning be for having something like that to exclude it from a team?
Good question. We are
so I think if there is one team that I wouldn't put it on, which I don't think I'd ever exclude it from a team, but if there was one situation where I had to exclude it, it would definitely be on a Tapu Lele Ultra Necrozma Psychic Spam team, where I'm not really taking advantage of the fake out. I don't really care about resetting my position with U-turn. I'm just trying to block priority and just hit things and hope they get KO'd, and just be really aggressive with my play.
Along the same lines of what Justin just said, I think that very aggressive, hyper-offensive teams can afford to drop Incineroar because, as I said, it drops the pace of play down. And what's interesting in the restricted dex formats is that we see that tactically letting a Pokemon faint is a much more viable strategy than in other years, because oftentimes a Pokemon might set up Tailwind or Trick Room and then go down immediately afterwards. And this can be a good thing because it allows your heavy hitters to get in. Incineroar has a habit of just not dying, and maybe that's not fast enough for the pace of play on these hyper-offensive teams where they want a Pokemon to take a KO or be KO'd so that the next big hitter can just come in. Because Incineroar, while it is a strong Pokemon, it's got very respectable stats for everything it needs to do. It's not often one-shotting a Pokemon that it's not hitting super effectively, and maybe that's just not good enough for a hyper-offensive team.
Right, and one thing I want to mention about Incineroar before we move on is that it, on top of all that other stuff it has, Dark type has a tendency to have a lot of different moves that are, really, really kind of like helpful in certain situations. Like you have Snarl on Incineroar to, control special attackers. You have Throat Chop if you want to, stop something from roaring out your Xerneas, or maybe stopping other Incineroar from using Snarl. It can knock off items, which it did a lot in 2018. You don't see much of that now, but it still does a lot of things. Its fire typing is really good because fairy types are really strong right now. So people are running steel types to kind of counteract that. And, fire obviously hits steel. So Incineroar can hit a lot of things super effectively, right now and last format. So there's just so much going on for it. And, I'm not sure I ever see it changing in the future unless, they change up the type chart or maybe, keep it from getting certain moves.
Okay, so both of you mentioned how this kind of slows down the pace of the game. Now, how does Incineroar, I guess, affect creativity in terms of team building here? How's it limiting it? How is it maybe improving it? But just what are your opinions on how Incineroar is affecting team building nowadays?
I think, there's the obvious answer of, if you don't have an Incineroar on your team, you're throwing. So you're basically, building a team with 5 slots in an Incineroar. But there's also, that you have to think about. It's also, its presence is limiting other things from being viable. So usually, like, the top teams are going to have a stranglehold on, things that, might be able to shine if it wasn't for, Incineroar being able to, intimidate, fake out, all on the same turn, and then you turn on the next turn. I think, the big example of this is that Incineroar is such a good Xerneas partner, but there's a lot of Xerneas counterplay that you can't really run just because of, intimidate plus fake out plus fire type plus knockoff plus all these other moves that it could have.
Yeah, and I think that Incineroar has encouraged lazy team building because of what Justin had said, where a lot of people will think, all right, like, I have an Incineroar on my team, where do I go from here? One of the players who I think is best at avoiding this is Jamie Boyd. He has a YouTube series where he shows the process of how his teams come together, and often doesn't use Incineroar, but still is able to put up very high results. So for you special snowflakes out there that just want to see the most creative teams, do check out his stuff, because Jamie always finds the perfect Pokemon to fill the role that he needs. Oftentimes it's wacky Pokemon Jamie, like Salazzle or Superior, and so...
Yes, it's really a specialty.
Jamie will tell you himself that Incineroar is awful, and Salazzle is superior in every way.
And like, I just think it's very important that players don't use Incineroar too much as a crutch. They don't just auto-assume it's on the team. They want to use it for what's necessary. Now, oftentimes, you might be 3 Pokemon into a team, and you think Incineroar would really round this out, and that's probably the right time to add it, but I don't think it's a Mon number 1. Incineroar is a tool to be used. It shouldn't be the centerpiece of a team, and teams should flesh themselves out that way. So I do encourage players to think a bit more outside the box and just add Incineroar when it's the right time. Don't just be lazy about it.
Yeah, and you can also be creative with Incineroar too, just because it has so many moveset options. Like last year we saw that, the most common Incineroar was just Fake Out, Flare Blitz, Snarl, U-Turn. Incineroar was on both World's Finalist teams last year, but neither of them had that same moveset. Emilio Forbes had a Incineroar with Protect because he was running the Paris Trap team, and I don't think he had Flare Blitz. Or maybe he didn't have Knockoff. I'm not sure. Paul Ruiz, he didn't have Knockoff. He had Snarl. And, his Snarl Incineroar showed why it was so good in the finals, actually. So, maybe you don't have to slap the most common Incineroar set on your team. Maybe you can kind of think about what kind of role you want it to serve in your games.
Yeah, fantastic points. Incineroar really just proving itself the ultimate king in VGC here, but provides one of the ultimate provides one of the best utility boxes for players to use. You don't have to just start with Incineroar in your team for building here, but put it on there when you feel it's necessary, when it's appropriate for your team, right? You don't have to limit yourself to using Incineroar and as well as in team building, but just remember that you are going to have to prepare for it. That will hold true for the rest of this season. And that can be helpful things. So any last things you want to talk about in Incineroar here, like Pinchberry best item? We didn't get to talk about items too much on it.
I'm liking Assault Vest right now. Pinchberry's still really good. I'm not a fan of the Incinium Z.
I think I'm a berry guy. I think I like the extra health, and just because it's just so reliable. Incineroar takes 75% a lot of the time. It's able to just take so many hits and Flare Blitz to activate it. So I really like that. The one last thought I wanted to say on Incineroar is, with its high usage, is that, like, I think Steven was kind of implying, you can just use that to your own advantage. as we had talked about in the past with the Berlin winning team using Neolego, Neolego really got to capitalize on Incineroar being on nearly every team, and the Rocky MZ just kind of clears away that problem. If you have an Incineroar problem, there are a lot of different ways that you can handle it, and it's something that you're going to see every time, so dedicating a Pokemon to removing it from the battle is not a bad idea.
What do you guys think of Incineroar as as just a regular Pokemon? Like, how do you guys like Incineroar? Do you think it looks cool? How would you rate it on a scale from 0 to 10?
That's a scale of say again, 0 to 10?
0 to 10, 1 to 10, just rate what you think of Incineroar.
I give it like a 2 or something. I mean, like, I was very, very disappointed. I remember, because I had started with Rowlet, and I was very all aboard Team Rowlet, but Gina had started with Litten, and when we found out what Incineroar was going to look like, she's like, I'm not going through with this, I'm using a Litten for the rest of the game. And yeah. I kind of stand by her on that. Like, they had so much potential. One of the things that irks me most about Incineroar is that, the whole classic joke about the fire starters being firefighting for 3 generations in a row. We got a break from that, and then we come back to a Pokemon that very likely should have been firefighting. Everyone likes to say, oh, he fights dirty, he's a dark type, but he's a wrestler, and I think wrestling is just so synonymous with fighting that you can't tell me he shouldn't have been a firefighting type, and we don't need more of those, so that's just what irks me about him.
Yeah,
okay, I'm gonna give my rating here, and then Justin, you can give your own as well, but I'm gonna give Incineroar a 7 for Gen 7. I am heavily biased because I am always a fire type starter, chooser, and supporter. So, I actually don't mind Incineroar's design that much. I think it looks really cool. It's a really cocky and shows off a lot. Shows off a lot. And, 7 for Gen 7 starter, Litten into Incineroar. So, there you go.
Oh, I think I'm gonna have to lean closer to Alex's rating. I was gonna say that 2 might be a little too high for it, so I think I'm gonna have to go.
Wow.
I'm gonna have to go with a 1. I just don't like the Wrestler Cat at all, man.
Okay, tough crowd here, but but that's not gonna our ratings here are not gonna stop it from its usage in VGC here coming up, and at least for these next few months, at least we know for sure. But that's Incineroar.
So one last thing before we wrap up, we did want to talk a bit about the amazing number of restricted combos that you can face in this format. Much higher than what we've seen in past years. I think that it's largely due to the introduction of the Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon legendaries. That's my thought on it, but Justin, you said that in Berlin you got to face a different restricted combo every round, and I wanted to ask you, what was that like?
Yeah, so it was kind of crazy. Like, there's so many different matchups I had to approach differently, and I think definitely there are a lot more viable restricted combos than in 2016. Just because we have more restricted Pokemon than before, and some of the old restricted Pokemon they didn't go anywhere, and now you can put some of these, on the same team together, like Rayquaza and, Ho-Oh is a team I faced in Berlin, and just things like that. And it's definitely kind of something you have to think about when you're building a team.
Yeah, we saw old ones increase in viability, whether it's the introduction of Z moves or Tapus or what have you. Ho-Oh very much liking to run that Fly In MZ. Ho-Oh's opposite, Lugia, also liking to run that Fly In MZ for the high crit chance with Tailwind and then Aeroblast guaranteeing a critical hit. So Z moves and other things have allowed old restricteds to become viable. The new ones, obviously when Pokemon introduces new stuff nowadays, they want to make it worth using, make it as viable as it can be. So Z moves, all of them get Z moves, Solgaleo, Lunala, and Necrozma. And that has been a large reason as to why those Pokemon are really good. They mash up really well against some of the old restricteds as well as alongside of them. So we're seeing just much, much higher usage. I felt like it was very clearly single-digit number of combos in 2016, but in this year, you could say that there are 10 plus viable restricted combos between the ORAS Legends, the XY Legends, the Sun and Moon Legends alone. And that's not including Pokemon like Ho-Oh or Dialga or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something interesting to look at too, is because with this increase of variety in these combinations, you see it's a little more exciting to play against, to team build for, just in terms of preparation, and it's more fun for the spectators. And it's really just been just changing the mechanics, especially with the terrains from the Tapus, as well as the introduction of Z moves, all this amalgamating together to make the metagame we're in now. And we'll just kind of see where the metagame's going to take us from here. Whether things are going to start panning out into being like, if we do end up finding, is there a top pair or combination coming up within the next month? We're going to see. I don't think something like that's going to pop up, but I think this has been really cool to just see throughout this metagame so far, is that there's a lot of viability in the variety here.
Now, I want to hear your opinion on this, Justin, but something Steven said in that sentence was very, very wrong, and it's coming from a player who hasn't played a lot of Ultra, in saying that he enjoys team building for all of these restricteds, and I could not disagree more.
Oh, no, it's...
All right, let's hear it.
It's really hard. Like in Berlin, I told you I ran the Assault Vest Rayquaza. I decided after that I had enough of, Assault Vest. I was just gonna slap on a Choice Band and hope I can one-hit KO as many of these restricted combinations as possible.
Yeah, it just seems that no matter what you do, you're gonna be weak to something. And at that point, you start to analyze the tournament meta, which can be hard. But, you can't have even matchups across the board. Even if you are thinking, okay, I want my team to be playable against all of the 10 plus restricted combos, it seems like that's just impossible. And so at this point, you kind of have to lean to having, maybe mostly 60s and then some 40s or lower, and it's going to be imbalanced because of just such a large number of restricted combos being viable. Whereas what we saw in 2016, it was much easier to pick the restricted combo that best fit you, learn how to play against the other ones, and while the teams differed, the game still, had play in it, and it was much easier to approach team building. It's got its pros and it's got its cons. It's great to see different stuff all the time, as opposed to seeing Xerneas Groudon in every team, but team building can feel impossible at times because of this, just so many different ways teams can go.
Okay, I mean, I get your point there, but I don't think every team will always have even matchups against everything else. I don't think that will always be the case, but that's one of the things I love about this game, is just finding that challenge. And this is part of the challenge, is that in team building and playing, you need to figure this stuff out. That's one of the things I enjoy most about this. And I don't think this is something that should be easy for players to pick up on and figure out immediately, or easy at all in general. I think this is one of the fun parts, is having this challenge in this game, is team building and playing. So, I'm standing behind what I said.
Yep. All right.
Fantastic. Well, I think, it's about time. So, lastly, we would just like to thank Justin for being on the show. Justin, thank you so much. We just really appreciate your time here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I was I love to listen to you guys in Season 1, and I'm happy to see the return, and I'm even more happy that I got to be part of it.
And yeah, so thanks, Justin, and I look forward to seeing you at Madison.
Yeah, see you this weekend.
Should be a very fun time for all players involved, so this will be a good one. Now, lastly, we're going to go through our outro really quickly. You can email us at vgchypervoice@gmail.com. That is our email. Send us some of your feedback and questions there. You can find us on YouTube, on Podbeans, on iTunes. You can subscribe and find our show there. You can download the show, watch/listen to the show. You can find us on Facebook, on our Facebook group, and you can follow the show on Twitter at the Hypervoice. You can also follow the three of us. So, Alex, where can we follow you?
You can follow me at Lexicon VGC.
And Justin, where could people follow you?
Yes, my Twitter account is at JustMrBurns.
Perfect. And I am at Super Morioka. We hope all of you have enjoyed the show. We hope you've had a lot of fun. I know we've had a lot of fun talking here. But once again, thank you to Alex and Justin for being on here. And thank you to all the listeners for being a part of this show. And stay tuned for more of the Hyper Voice.
Alola.